Hello race fans, welcome to another video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date on future uploads. Currently on the road to 1K before the end of the year, so every little bit of your support helps. Today we will be talking about the Coca-Cola 600, and this was a great race all things considered. The race as a whole felt so much better than what it actually was, and it was all because of the TV broadcast from Prime. That's right, people, we no longer have to deal with Fox and their antics for the rest of the year. Their coverage for the season ended with the All-Star race last week. Was a little bit worried that Prime would be a bust because of how much hype there was surrounding it. Usually when there is a lot of hype built around a certain event or thing, it tends to be either hit or miss, but thankfully it ended up being an absolute hit. Prime absolutely delivered on all fronts. Presentation, graphics, camera work, but most importantly, their coverage. Just one race in, and Adam Alexander, Dale Jr., and Steve Letarte are already a much better trio than Mike Joy, Harvick, and Clint Bowyer. And it's all because of one simple reason. They took the broadcast seriously, from start to finish. No flashiness, no shenanigans, no nonsense, no nothing. They just kept it 100. They called the race without deviating with some random storyline or narrative. Not only did they go commercial free the entire way, but both their pre-race and especially their post-race coverage was extensive. I believe they stayed on air for about an hour and a half after the race ended. I wouldn't be surprised if they stayed on air until post-race inspection had concluded. But this race was a perfect example of how much a TV broadcast can boost or hinder the experience from someone watching on TV. Also, Daniel Trotta, Carl Edwards, and hell, even Corey LaJoie himself, they did a really great job on that front. Which is really crazy for me to say, but that's just how good Prime was. They made Corey LaJoie not look too out of place on TV. And again, it all came down to professionalism. When you take a more serious and professional approach to broadcasting your races, people would not just stay tuned in, they will also take the sport of NASCAR as a whole serious. And another underrated aspect of their whole coverage was that the people doing the play-by-play in the booth, they were actually on the track itself and not from some remote location watching the action from a set of screens. I know the big networks nowadays, they like to do this in an effort to cut corners, but it really takes away from the action itself when you find out the people calling the shots are doing it from some remote studio and not the race itself. You can really tell the difference. Dare I say, not only did they blow Fox out of the water, but NBC as well, which is crazy because for years we have touted NBC as being better than Fox, and while it definitely still is, don't get me wrong, the reason why we held NBC to such high regard is because of how terrible Fox had been in recent years. Yet here comes Prime putting together some awesome coverage, and now I have a feeling everyone will be more critical of NBC moving forward since they're no longer the gold standard when it comes to broadcasting NASCAR races. But anyways, on to the race itself, because like I said, it wasn't as bad as we thought, and there's a lot to unpack here, so buckle up. For once, the Gen 7 did not hinder the race to the point that it was near unwatchable. Yes, aero was still a thing, and clean air was still king, making it hard to pass, especially for the lead, but it was not impossible. Again, Charlotte Motor Speedway is a multi-groove track with a relatively worn surface, which means that tire wear does matter, especially in the long run. At first glance, you might look at the finishing results and go, wait, William Byron led 70% of the race and swept all three stages. Was the race that good? And I'm here to tell you, yes, it was. Y'all remember how good the 2022 Coca-Cola 600 was and how that race had 31 lead changes? Well, this year's edition had 34, and with far less wrecks to boot. Again, Byron led 70% of the race, yes. But it wasn't like at Darlington where he led all the laps he did in a row. No, there was constant passing for the lead, especially between him and Denny Hamlin. Those two accounted for almost half of the lead changes, just passing each other for the lead, especially in the second half of the race. And the race had its fair share of comers and goers, which is to be expected, honestly. I mean, it's a 600-mile race. The most fascinating part, however, is just how many of those comers and goers had arguably their best performance of the season so far, even if a couple of those guys didn't necessarily get the results they deserved. Guys like Brad Keselowski, AJ Allmendinger, Ross Chastain, Michael McDowell, and Chase Briscoe, who started from the pole by the way, they all earned their best finish of the season so far. And even others like Carson Hocevar, Noah Gragson, Eric Jones, and John Hunter Nemechek, they spent a good chunk of laps in the top 10, especially in the first half, and they showed really good pace, even if they didn't necessarily get the finishes they deserved. Speaking of guys that didn't get the finishes they probably deserved, Kyle Larson. Man, this guy had a rough Sunday, not just in this race, but in the Indy 500 as well. He had a rough time racing his way up to the front because, as it turns out, those new hybrid Indy cars, they have similar aero issues to the Gen 7 it seems. And the moment he finally creeps into the top 20, he wrecks out, not even halfway into that race. The only silver lining from that otherwise unfortunate series of events was the fact that Larson wouldn't need to scramble to make it to Charlotte and worry about whether he would make the race on time, because due to the delayed start and a couple early cautions, it was estimated that Larson would have a really rough time making it to the start of the race. So I thought, well, Indy's out of the way now, so we can 100% focus on this race now, right? And early on, it seemed like that was the case, and he looked like the guy to beat, even over William Byron himself, for about 40 laps. Then he hit the wall, bent the toe link, and then spun out a couple laps later just as green flag pit stops were about to get on the way. He would never recover his track position, eventually falling a lap down, and he wouldn't get the free pass until stage 2 ended on lap 200. And then, just like in Indy, when it looked like he was finally marching to the front, he crashes out. This time it was by way of Briscoe making contact with Blaney off turn 4 and then coming down into Suarez, although a closer look at the replay suggests that Suarez might have run Briscoe a little too wide off the corner. So the 99 and 12 wreck, Blaney hits the wall, and Suarez spins out of control into the infield, collects Larson as well as Justin Haley. The impact destroys Larson's right rear toe link, and he is done for the race. He didn't even get to complete 600 miles in the entire day, because he wrecked out before halfway in the Indy 500, so he only completed around 200 something miles there. And then at Charlotte, he completed, I don't know, a little bit over 300 miles, I guess. So yeah, all of that adds up to 500 something. I think it was like 597 miles. Yeah, he didn't even get to complete 600 miles. In a day where it was pretty realistic that he would get to complete all 1100, he didn't even get to complete 600. That's really sad, man. But yeah, Larson's issues kind of opened up the door for Byron to dominate the race, as he had no competition for the most part. Denny Hamlin was there, and they had a nice battle for the lead, like I said, especially in the second half. But you could tell with the way the 24 stayed with the 11 and was coming back to take the lead every single time, he was superior. He wasn't just leading all those laps due to clean air like he did at Darlington. He got a really fast car too. He even pulled away to a 10-second lead over second place at one point. And after the 11 team made a miscalculation on what was supposed to be their final pit stop, where they didn't get enough fuel onto the car, as the gasman didn't hook the can in properly, they had to make an extra pit stop with about 10 to go, because that's just how short they were on fuel. This turned a potential race-winning performance into a 16th place finish. So you would think, with the 11 team out of the running, you think Byron will cruise to victory. That is until Tyler Reddick, another guy who had a top 5 car, until a speeding penalty relegated him to mid-pack. He got loose off turn 2, got really sideways and hit the wall relatively hard, and this happened right in front of the leader too. Thankfully no caution came out, but because this happened right in front of the 24, Byron had to check out big time, which allowed the second place car of Ross Chastain to run him down. And I was fully expecting the 24 to pull away again, but as he approached lap traffic, that dirty air I had been talking about started affecting him, and Chastain just kept reeling him in because the 24 was unable to hold the top lane due to the lap traffic taking his line away. So he started to run this awkward middle lane in turns 3 and 4, which allowed that one car to get even closer. And with 6 laps to go, it happened. Ross made the pass on Byron, entering turn 1 for the lead, with a bit of a slide job too, as he kind of pinched the 24 into the wall quite a bit. But the 24 tried to come back, but his rear tires were shot from trying to maneuver around lap traffic so much in the closing laps. And just like that, Ross Chastain, after wrecking out in practice and starting dead last, with a backup car that his team stayed up until 2:30 a.m. just building it from scratch, wins not just his first race of the season, but his first crown jewel event. And he did so by beating out William Byron, who up until that point had gone undefeated on the weekend. As in the Xfinity race on Saturday, he swept both stages and won. And after sweeping all 3 stages in the 600, he was less than 10 laps away from wrapping up what would have been a perfect weekend for him at his home track, but he just got run down in the end by the Watermelon Man. And just for that, I gotta give Ross Chastain driver of the day. I mean, he started dead last on a backup car. He didn't turn any laps in for the longest race of the year, and going on to not only win but straight up beat the dominant car in the process. This win might have not only given the one team a big boost in morale, but you never know, it could also galvanize the entire Trackhouse bunch heading into the second half of the regular season. And the feel-good stories don't end there, because like I said, there were several good storylines throughout the field, and if it wasn't for Chastain, I would have had a really rough time deciding who my driver of the day would have been. AJ Allmendinger finished 4th after qualifying 5th and staying in the top 10 pretty much the entire race, scoring points on all 3 stages. On a Kaulig racing car, Brad Keselowski finished 5th, right behind AJ. After an otherwise abysmal start to the year, he finally gets his first top 5 of the season. Michael McDowell in 7th, Noah Gragson 10th, just 2 other drivers that ran top 10 for a good chunk of the race. SVG finished 14th after starting deep in the field like most of his Trackhouse teammates. And speaking of Trackhouse, Connor Silage, he got a solid outing, finishing 23rd despite getting involved in an incident early in the race with none other than Jimmy Johnson, who, as fate would have it, was making his 700th Cup start in this year's 600. And while we're on the topic, Legacy Motor Club looked pretty good, at least in the first half, because in the second half they kind of faded away as they lost track position, but they ran top 10 in the first half. They gained some stage points. Eric Jones and especially John Hunter Nemechek looked really good. Nemechek at one point was running in the top 5 too. Of course, as the race went on, they lost some track position on pit road. Nemechek, I believe, even hit the wall at one point, which explains why he finished 27th, but Jones managed to hold on for a 13th place finish, despite starting from outside the top 25. Now, with all these good runs, we of course had our first share of heartbreaks. As I mentioned, Hamlin, Larson, Blaney, Reddick, and the issues that each of them had. Jimmy Johnson, of course, finished dead last after the incident he got with Silage. Not the way he wanted his 700th Cup race to go. But the biggest heartbreak of all was Carson Hocevar. Like Chastain, he started deep in the field. As a matter of fact, he started second last in 39th because we had a full 40-car field for this race. The reason he started 39th was because of a spinning he got in qualifying, by the way. By lap 200, however, he was already in the top 5. You gotta remember, he looked really fast in practice, like Ross Chastain. And from there, he would go on to become an outside threat to win the race. Maybe the 3rd best car in the race behind Byron and Denny Hamlin, even challenging for the lead for parts of Stage 3. Sadly, it will all go up in smoke, literally, when, after a great pit stop, moved them up to 2nd and an actual shot at challenging for the win. Of all things that could have happened, his engine blew up on the restart as he was going through the gears. Don't you hate it when that happens? So yet again, another what could have been for Hocevar, and he's had plenty of those this season already. Races where his finishing position is not an indicator of how well he actually raced. I swear, he would be above the playoff cut line, or at the very least close to it, if he actually finished where he raced the entire day. His stats so far suggest he's going through the classic sophomore slump, but if you actually sit down and watch the races, you'll quickly realize that couldn't be further from the truth. So yeah, a lot to talk about in this race. One of the best races of the season without a doubt, like I said. While the on-track product was good but not great, a dirty air was still an issue, but it wasn't impossible to pass. Tire wear mattered, especially in the long run. Again, like I said when talking about the Xfinity race, Charlotte Motor Speedway might be the best 1.5 mile track on the schedule. It's pretty close between Ed and Homestead, if we're being honest. But what really put it over the top and really elevated this race for me was the broadcast. Great presentation, awesome commentary, tremendous camera work. They even gave us extended coverage, both pre-race and post-race. This race was the perfect example of how much a good TV broadcast matters and how much of a difference it can make. The TV broadcast can make a good race feel not as good as it actually was, or like what happened today, can make a good race feel like a modern classic. I'll admit, this race didn't feel like an A-, but I'm gonna give it an A- regardless, just for the work that Amazon Prime did. I had a lot of fun watching this race, and I really hope NASCAR looks at the positive reception to Prime and they expand on their partnership. I don't care what the boomers say, that it's unfair how NASCAR races are on stream and not on cable TV anymore. I'm sorry, times have changed, and literally every other major sport has migrated to streaming. Dare I say, as someone who doesn't usually pay for streaming services and has to find other ways to watch NASCAR races, I wouldn't mind paying for this, as long as it means we keep getting top-notch coverage like this. Safe to say, NASCAR on Prime is here to stay, ladies and gentlemen.